Sylvia Plath's poem "Mirror" is composed of two stanzas, each containing 9 lines. In this way, the form of the poem may be viewed as representation of a mirror's image, with each stanza reflecting the other. In the first stanza, the voice of the mirror might be seen as playful, and the opening lines almost seem like clues to a child's riddle. But there is a dramatic turn at the beginning of the second stanza, and the poem's last 9 lines, while nearly identical in form to the first stanza, present a far darker message. The poem Mirror is written from a mirror's perspective, and the poem presents at first what seems to be light-hearted observation on the unfailing honesty and accuracy of its reflection. In its second stanza, however, the tone of the poem darkens and the theme of honesty undergoes a dramatic change, as a woman finds her reflection in the mirror to be an unwanted reminder of her age and her mortality, and ultimately a source of terror. Let's see the summary of the poem. Were it not for its title, the opening lines of Mirror might seem to be clues to a child's riddle. The clues quickly make it evident that the first person speaker of the poem is the mirror referred to in the title. The terse, chopped phrasing of the first line, along with language such as exact and no preconceptions, help to establish the mirror's persona as blunt, honest, and unemotional. In lines 2 to 5, Plath presents the first of several unexpectedly violent images, as she depicts the mirror immediately swallowing all it comes into contact with, without regard to the emotional concerns of love and dislike. The mirror's denial of its cruelty in line 4 seems based on the proposition that truth cannot be equated with cruelty, a proposition which will come under closer scrutiny in the poem's final lines. This section of the poem also seems to call into question the nature of God when the mirror calls itself the eye of a little God. Plath seems to be using the cold and unemotional reflection of the mirror as a metaphor for a distant and uncaring God. Plath's characteristically dry humor is present in lines 6 to 9, as the mirror describes how it spends its days staring at the wall it faces. But in this humorous observation is also a further hint of the mirror's meticulous and unforgiving nature, as it notes not only the wall's color but also its minor imperfections. Despite these speckles, however, the mirror seems to have formed an attachment to the wall whose image it so often reflects, an image that flickers because of the passing of days and nights. Plath's choice of the word flickers, a word which most people would associate with a very short-lived source of light such as candle or a match, to describe how the mirror views the passing of entire days, indicates how very differently the mirror views time and mortality in comparison to humans. With the beginning of the second stanza, the poem takes on a much darker tone. The change is abruptly signaled by the presentation of a different type of mirror, the reflective surface of a lake. This recalls the mythological figure Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection in a lake and died as a result of this impossible infatuation. Plath has good reason to use water imagery in these final lines, since it provides the same reflective qualities as the mirror, but also suggests depth, coldness, the unknown, and the threat of death by drowning. Lines 11 and 12 seem to suggest a yearning for truth on the part of the unnamed woman who ponders her reflection in search of what she really is. But paired with this yearning for truth is a willingness to reject it, not finding the reality of her reflection to her liking. The woman turns her gaze away toward the softer, more forgiving light of candles or the moon. Here, Plath seems to contrast the starkly accurate image of the mirror with a more romantic and less realistic world of illusion. Despite the woman's apparent rejection of the mirror, it continues its work of reflecting her image faithfully. Even when her back is turned, her distress at being continually drawn to her own image in the mirror and yet being repelled by what she sees there is made increasingly evident by her tears and agitation of hands. As the mirror understands, however, the reflected image is important to her, and each morning she is compelled to return to it. The closure to the poem presents an example of the type of sudden, unexpectedly violent imagery for which Plath's poetry is famous. The lake imagery is developed as the mirror becomes a grim reminder of the woman's own lost youth. It is she, the poem suggests, who had been the young girl who was drowned in the lake. Here, the lake seems to represent time. It is time that has killed the young girl and turned her into an old woman. Plath then employs a rather shocking metaphor, comparing the woman's reflection to a terrible fish rising from the depths of a lake. Her face has been made grotesque by the passage of time. Looking back to lines 8 and 9, we can see that the mirror on the wall similarly represents the passage of time, marking the progression of phases and darkness. This poem is like a mirror, seemingly a static picture, it actually progresses. The silvered glass on a wall changes to the reflective surface of a lake. Time passes, a young girl grows old, and it moves from apparent objectivity. The mirror is presented as truthful and unaffected by motion to the subjective experience of the woman's distress at the sight of a reflection. The individual's search for self is represented in this poem on several levels by the woman who peers into the lake attempting to determine what she really is. The woman's quest for self discovery is genuine and the lake is important to her. But she cannot accept what is faithfully reflected in its depths and she returns morning after morning hoping for better results. The young girl that she once has been drowned by the woman herself and is now replaced to her horror by an old woman who rises from the depths like a terrible fish. Little wonder then that the woman prefers to delude herself with the more flattering representations provided by candlelight and moonlight. Meanwhile, the identity of the narrator as mirror or lake is also in question. In the first stanza, the mirror takes on the qualities of a person, insisting that it is a disinterested observer that neither distorts nor evaluates what stands before it. Yet the reliability of this self-assessment is undermined by the mirror's belief that the pink speckled wall it gazes at all day is a part of its own heart. The mirror's association and the identification with the wall become so complete that when people use the mirror for its intended purpose, their faces are considered intrusions that separate the mirror from a part of itself, its heart. In the second stanza, the identity of the poem's narrator is even more problematic. Since it claims that it is now a lake, its voice, though, is remarkably like that of the mirror. Although the surface of the calmest lake could hardly reflect images with the same clarity as a mirror, the narrator still insists that its renderings are true. Its reference to the faces and the darkness mentioned in the first stanza provides further evidence that the mirror and the lake are one and the same. Again, the narrator's knowledge of self is less than accurate. Cruelty is not its intention, but the result measured by the woman's reaction suggests that the narrator is not the best judge of its own intentions. The theme of death runs throughout much of Plath's work and appears in Mirror as well. The idea that everyday objects, while seemingly benign, actually harbor the specter of death is a recurring theme in Plath's poems. Here, the mirror maintains a passive and non-judgmental demeanor, but then turns into a malevolent lake from whose depths an image of the woman's own mortality rises, like a terrible fish. This transformation is signaled even in the first stanza by the mirror's admission that it swallows whatever it sees, suggesting that it is not so benign after all. The lake has swallowed the young girl who has been drowned in its depths by the old woman who replaces her.